So thank you for coming into the surgery today, Rob Caslick. Please, Rob, I'm here today to help you diagnose whatever decision challenge that you're facing. So perhaps you could tell me what ails you today in the decision world.
Thanks for allowing me into your practice, Doctor. Basically, I run a social enterprise. It's a business for good. But importantly to me, it's a business. The more business that we can have, the more good that we can do, right? So one of our challenges, and it's a good challenge to have, I acknowledge that, but one of the challenges that we have is we're getting a lot of funding for the impact side to do good. As a social enterprise, we want to derive most of our revenue from business, from being able to sell things and using the profits to do good. One of our challenges, and again, it's a good thing, that we have really good outcomes on the things that we do, so that we employ women who are vulnerable or homeless to make our food and products. We have a lot of success in that and getting them jobs post, and it's attracting government funds and philanthropic funds, which is great. But my challenge is, how do we get to a point where I don't want the program or the impact leading the business? And so one of the things that I want to look at or investigate further is primarily because we take too much government funding, and clearly we can demonstrate impact for that government funding, but one of the challenges is in 3 years' time when the funding runs, we'll have to cut the program and kind of pull right back when other issues are coming up and the government chooses to go down a different path. And it's also a big distraction on the organisation. At what point do I take heed and stop and essentially turn down funding for program or for good and focus more on selling widgets or selling our soaps and catering and try to drive the business first? And I think a big part of that was coming through COVID when our business performed poorly, to be honest, because various reasons, and we've had a lot more funding come through on the impact side. And this year alone, there is significant funds coming from a variety of sources, which is great because it's going to allow us to scale our impact. We exist to change the course of the lives of vulnerable women, and this funding is going to help that. But one thing that's actually really important to me personally is, and one thing I love about the organisation is the business, the strategies that are coming up with new ways to grow revenue, that we just do a whole lot of good with that revenue. And so there's kind of a point. And even when we look at our planning over the next 3 years, a lot of that is planning around program and less planning around business and kind of scaling our revenue. And so I need to stop and take heed of that a little bit. Inherently, I set up this business to do good, and here we are, an opportunity to do a hell of a lot of good. Personally, do I step out of the way and let the good grow, or do I go hard on the business and then want to generate programs at our own accord?
I think I might need to ask you a little bit more about your business and so on, so that I can understand a bit what's going on. So what I hear is that the kind of the pain that you're experiencing at the moment, it sounds like it's a tension for you in your business between we can be funded via some way, so government money, etc., almost directly to do the good.
Yeah.
But there's a bunch of risk with that. And the risk is if the government's agenda changes, that money goes away, we can no longer continue doing that good.
Yeah.
And so let me ask you this question. Is part of the tension for you how to be confident that you can continue and do more good sustainably
100%.
over the time?
That's it. And even the pitch to government and philanthropy and anyone who's backing us is that we don't have to keep asking for money if we can do the business. But like the volume of funds that's coming for the program, I like to shoot high and have stretch. I like to talk big, but this is really significant funding. I know that we can deliver on the program, deliver on the impact, but I guess where I'm not as confident, or I want to make more better decisions around making sure there's business first. There's revenue generation so that we don't have to put the hand out again or risk having to fold up shop and then start again somewhere else.
It sounds like you're in a similar situation to other people that I see, where there's a bit of a balance somewhere between the sustainability, the long-term outcomes, and the doing of good and the intangible value of the work that you participate in, and a bit of a tension there between the experience of, is it commercial versus is it doing good? Now, it would help me to understand a little bit more. So you've used terms like program and widgets. Perhaps you could just give me a bit of a picture of your organisation.
We sell catering mainly to corporate Australia, mainly to Sydney actually, so corporates in Sydney. So everything from morning teas to boardroom lunches to canapes for events. And we sell lots of lunches direct to consumer. But we employ women who are either homeless or at high risk of homelessness to make that food. So we have a head chef and 2 or 3 sous chefs, and then up to 10 women on program. We say program, but it's a part of the business. We couldn't operate without them. And it's a 6-month program or 6 months fixed term kind of contract that we offer. And really it's about believing in that person again. Many of them have never worked in a commercial kitchen. Many of them have gone through significant trauma, domestic violence mostly. And all we do is say, look, we acknowledge the trauma that you've had before you've arrived, but you've got a job to do. We believe in you, go do the job. And then they all of a sudden start to believe in themselves. And once they do that, the magic happens, and then they have much more confidence to go about their life and are able to make better decisions themselves, better financial decisions themselves around their life. And so at about month 4, we link them to other corporates or organisations that might like to employ them post Too Good. And then we turn over our staff every 6 months. On the business side, so the catering and the events business, because of the level of kind of impact or essentially inefficiencies in that kind of vertical, just breaks even at best. So we also sell a lot of soaps and lotions and sanitizers and like to corporates as well, into the end of trips or for the building toilets. We know that's an easy kind of contract manufacture. We know we can grow that business, and what we are doing with that vertical is driving profits in to pay for the program. And so that's the two verticals we have. One's a bit more of a revenue generator, one's lots of impact and program. But like I say, at best, it is actually loss leading the food business because of the amount of impact that we have. As part of that, we also donate about 1,000 meals a week to different women's shelters around Sydney and South Sydney. And what that does is actually 2 things. One, it delivers beautiful food to women's shelters. Secondly, it actually puts the person on program in a position of power that they're actually supporting other women in a similar circumstance to perhaps what they were. And so that's a big part of the food business. And that's also where most of our social impact is. And so typically that's the program that the government wants to scale or philanthropy wants to scale. And we have an 85% chance of getting someone a job post that program, which is really good. We'd never get 100% because we don't employ that person if we think they can get a job without us. We kind of work with really high needs. And so at the point where we're getting to a success rate, we'll look at the program. So actually we can have greater impact with someone who would struggle much harder to get a job at the start. And so that's the organisation in a bit of a nutshell. The funding that's coming in is trying to fund the program, the social workers and the women, to get that kind of a starter for them to take this to other areas of New South Wales.
Okay, so I can hear that there's a couple of things going on. There's sort of 2 areas. When you talk about the doing the good, the having the impact, there's the helping women on a journey towards self-fulfillment and finding roles and so on.
Yeah.
And one of the drivers for that is we want to help those women we can give the most help to. Yeah. So the biggest piece of help, so that's one I can hear. What I'm listening for, Rob, is just what are the drivers behind what you do? Because one of the things that will help you make these kind of hard decisions is being really clear on why it is you do what you do. Yeah. So one thing you do is helping these women on a path that will have them be fulfilled and empowered and engaged in community, have jobs and so on. And the other, I hear you, is providing a better environment, experience of being valued to women in shelters through the food that you provide into those shelters. So that sounds like that's the kind of the good that you do. And then the commercial business is selling the catering side and then soaps and lotions and so on. And just also to be clear on the why you do what you do, is there a social good component to that too? So if I put your soaps and lotions into my bathrooms, will my patients come in and say, oh, it's great to see how you're providing for something greater than simply you've got nice soap?
So definitely. So the soap is the revenue, the profits from the soap go to pay for the employment hour or the donated meal. 50% of profits go straight into the program. So that's how we're going to look at funding or the growth in the organisation. I want to focus more on the sale of those kind of products, the good things we call them, purely because it actually generates revenue to pay for the program.
So another question for you, again, in decision making, what really helps us is start to be really clear on what's a good outcome look like for us. So just perhaps, if you may, Rob, it would help me to understand a little bit of what had you get into this? How come you have this business that's doing this mixture of commercial gain to fund social good?
So I was an engineer and I set up a soup kitchen in Kings Cross. I always loved working with people and being around community, being around people who are doing it tough, to be honest. And as an engineer, every Wednesday night, it's just go and feed about 50 people in the Cross. I used to love it. Like everyone, we were busy. I was always I don't have time to do this tonight, but it was my happy pill. I'd get there, and after an hour or so, I just feel elated and high. So selfishly, I would get a lot out of doing it. I always wanted to end up doing this kind of work, but never knew how I was going to draw a salary. And so literally the soup kitchen, it was an organic soup kitchen. It was going quite well, doing about 50 people a week. It was part of a bigger soup kitchen, which is called St. Canis's, and they serve about 1,000 people each week. And so I had the dream of, let's scale the organic soup kitchen on the Wednesday night to take over and provide an organic meal for 1,000 people each week. And I love a collaboration, and I work with some great chefs, and I work with an ad agency called Droga 5, and they come up with the name Too Good. They did this little video clip, and I actually set up Too Good with another engineer, and we worked all the weekend prior to prep for our launch. We were chopping. I remember cutting significant amount of sweet potatoes for this kind of fancy soup that a guy called Greg Doyle, a chef, he's a famous chef. He designed these soups, and so we thought, well, this is going to be crazy. It's going to go off, and we launched on the Tuesday, and then there was like crickets. We sold 6, and so what the hell am I going to do with these 6 soups? The idea was we sell a soup, we use the profit to donate a meal, donate soup. And so these 6 soups left over to donate. And so I went up to Women's Shelter and knocked on the door and said, hey, my name's Rob. We did this thing called Too Good. These are designed by Greg Doyle, and they looked at me funny and said, who's Greg Doyle? And I just gave them the story. But then they took these soups. They were also in glass jars. They photographed well and look good on Instagram, but it was more so around trying to be sustainable with the packaging.
Of course.
And they took these soups, and then I was like, okay, that's cool. And then 2 weeks later, another Women's Shelter said, hey, we want some of those soups that you've just donated. And they were no problem. And when the third one said that we want some soups, I thought, actually, what's going on here? And I went on LinkedIn, found this lady called Lisa McAdams, who I went to meet. I gave her the story, and she gave me some really interesting tips. Lisa was a domestic violence consultant. And the next day, after telling the story, she wrote me a letter. And I didn't realise at the time during the meeting, but she had gone through about 7 years of quite significant physical and emotional abuse, and ended up at a women's shelter in North Sydney. And she said when she arrived, she was given a toiletry set. But for her, it wasn't the fact that she was given toiletries. It was the fact that someone had gone to the effort of wrapping this toiletry set in cellophane and tying this really beautiful bow. And that someone had gone to the effort of neatening the ends of that bow really said to her that she was worthy of love and respect. So when people think about domestic violence, they rarely think about what was missing in that relationship, the love and the affection. And in that kind of bow was actually, she said it was pivotal in her healing process. And so I thought, well, that's where our social impact is. Then let's focus on women in women's services, in women's shelters. And then as we started to sell a few more, we thought, actually, we're going to need to employ someone to help the chef. Why don't we employ someone from the shelter? And so we did. And then it sort of started to grow. And then I was like, this is where the heart is. I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to go part-time engineering, part-time Too Good. And then bombed. I failed at both because no one really gives a crap. No one cares what day you work, what day you don't work. And so I'm going to keep the engineering certificate in the back pocket and go all in. And the certificate's still there. I brushed it off a couple of times during COVID, but haven't had to go back. And so, yeah, I love it. It's just incredible to be a part of and to see the impact and the transformation that, you know, you can have when what you're really doing is believing in someone. And so that's where the heart is. What I love also is growing the business, the challenge of growing a business that does good. I think I wouldn't be doing it if there's no impact. I wouldn't be doing it for a standard business. But the excitement of chasing the business and growing the business and coming up with new ways of doing things and thinking about things differently and using our values to guide you is incredible in my view.
This is an amazing story, Rob. Often poor decision making comes because we make it based on factors that we don't really care about. And you're in a very interesting situation, which I'm sure other people who might hear this conversation would relate to, which is, on the one hand, there's an obvious you should do this thing because this is the good that's out there. Others might hear this conversation and say, you sound like you're an entrepreneur businessman. You should be growing this business, taking the business to the moon. Come on, you know, what's going on? Don't worry about this good and government money nonsense. So you've got clearly a commercially successful organization. And part of the challenge in decision making is to park those things that everyone else tells us we should be doing and actually get true to ourselves so that when we make a decision, we sit back and with satisfaction execute on that decision really well. So I can hear for you that 2 things at play. One is no question your emotional commitment to the impact you know you can have on these women and how you can see how that can scale. And I sense this, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, is there's also if you felt that the good was going to turn off, that would be really bad for you. Okay, so there's a strong drive for you of sustainability of the good you're having. And a risk in the sustainability is if it's dependent on a third party called the government policy, that turning off could have all sorts of dire consequences which you don't want to have. That's what I can hear. And then I can hear the other thing that's driving you is your newfound enthusiasm for business, as in there's a challenge here. So let me just ask you about that, because that could be another driver. I'm just interested to understand how this shapes the sort of decision you're facing. What is it when you say, I love growing a business and seeing what's possible? Is it about growing this kind of business? In other words, this is not your everyday business that just sells widgets, makes money and puts cash in the bank. This is a business that does what it does in order to provide the good. And there's a sort of direct and indirect relationship between the commercial outcomes, called the indirect relationship is with the cash I can do good. And then the direct relationship called everything the business does gets another meal when it does direct good. So what is it about that has you go, I love growing a business and the challenge of that? What's that about?
Yeah, interesting question. I know that growing the business just does good, right? In my heart, it's more the win or the getting the deal or chasing that kind of success side. I'd like to say that it's actually also the impact, but I found this role or this business quite late in life, and it's something that I'm enjoying, that I think I'm quite good at. And it's just a nice spot to be in, a role that I'm really happy with. And so I think coming up with new ideas and new business, looking for the wins and the success in that role, I think that's what is probably more the driver than on the business side than the impact. Like I said, I wouldn't be doing this if there was no impact. But as far as on the business side, what I love about it is really the challenge to winning that contract or creating a really amazing product that people love. And I think that's probably deeper, that's more the interest. But the business side for me is purely the designing. I love designing a product or a solution. Say, for instance, I've spent too much time and probably too much of our company money on designing this dispenser made of ocean plastic. And I've just loved tinkering away and doing something that solves a problem a little bit differently. Or like we've got this soap contract, we either need to purchase our own dispensers that the building could use, or I said, well, let's just design our own, which is clearly a much harder problem to solve. But the opportunity then was, how do we kind of bring in rescue plastic? The luxury of having that challenge of trying to solve that a little bit differently. And that's really been driving me a lot. Perhaps it is ego, like trying to come up with something new and something innovative. I'm not sure, but it's certainly what I love, that kind of tinkering, like the engineering side as well as the business side of it as well.
What always works in this clinic is people to be open with what's really going on for them, because one of the challenges is treating the presenting symptoms versus treating the underlying cause. And in decision making, what we're trying to do is to get to what's underneath that, because the decisions that we make, we get to live with them, and either we're going to be satisfied or we're going to be deeply dissatisfied. And most things I see is people making decisions poorly, such that they then wish they'd made a different decision or they regret where they've ended up. My favorite diagnosis is a medicine I guess I would call decision thinking, which is bringing some structure to your decision making, bring some transparency to your decision making. And so as we have this conversation, seeing how can decision thinking help you, Rob? The first thing in decision thinking is understanding how you make a decision. And actually it's understanding what the decision is. So we've talked a lot around the background and where you're at, and I can hear some of the trade-offs that you're grappling with. So let's try and put our finger on the decision itself. Is the decision about where to put your effort to either find more of the government money or grow the business more? Is the decision about when to say no to government money? If we were to try and capture this as I've got some choices here, what would you say the choices are for you?
The decision is really, do we say no? Because the funds, there has been an indication the funds will do a lot of work and a lot of governance behind it, but we're fairly confident that the funds will be forthcoming. The decision really is, do we take the funds or not? And then secondly, if we do take the funds, how do we make sure we are building the business or it's in line with where the business is going? How do we make sure that it's not a distraction? Impact's never a distraction, but it actually is if we're going to be doing something in a random part of Australia that's off-brand. Whereas in my view, it'd be much better this is our product suite over the next 5 years. How do we make sure that's part of that? And so then it's easier to grow the organisation. And I speak from experience. We had some government funds to take a site to Melbourne, and we demonstrated the impact. We demonstrated that we could scale, and we were able to hit the objectives of the grant, and we acquitted it, and it all went really well. However, it went poorly for business, so we had to close the kitchen there because I didn't invest enough in business development and wanted to make sure that when the funds were no longer, we could have had a proper business there and to grow the revenue. It was quite painful to have to end that kitchen essentially. Perhaps it's the old wounders wiggling around in there saying, well, actually just be careful here. Like, this is an amazing opportunity to have significant impact. So it's hard to say no to that because of the opportunity. There's other organisation that has incredible impact as well. So maybe it's just more of a, perhaps not us, I don't know.
Let me see if I can frame up the decision that I can hear is actually the underlying presentation. Firstly, I'll say another thing that sits behind decision-making always is a set of assumptions. Most often, one of the reasons we talk about transparency in decision-making is those assumptions are often hidden away. So let me test an assumption. I can hear an assumption behind your decision-making is that you can have the commercial success sufficient that will carry on the work that you're doing. That's an assumption. It might not be accurate. And of course, something I say to all my patients is decision-making is about the future. So there is no certainty or objectivity. There's always going to be some subjectivity about the decisions based on assumptions. So if the assumption is you believe you can have sufficient commercial success to carry the business on and to deliver the impact you have. So if we put that on one side for a moment, is that a sensible assumption?
I think so.
If we put that on one side, then actually the decision sounds like a series of decisions when an opportunity presents itself. Let's say a grant is available or you see someone wants to make a philanthropic contribution. Actually, the decision is, do we take this or not? And the way I would diagnose helping you at that moment, firstly, is to have a clear way you would make that decision when it presents itself. And often making hypothetical decisions in advance of the fact don't help us because we go, if that happened, I might make this decision this way or the other. Until the decision presents itself, often it's not useful to us. So what works is having okay, I know how I'm going to make that decision. And what I can hear in terms of how you might choose to make that decision is what matters to you. So what matters to you is the sustainability of the good, and therefore you want to make sure that when an opportunity presents itself, it will deliver on that sustainability. In other words, there's not things attached to it that when it stops, here's what happens. So you could ask the question, if someone says, Rob, here's a potential grant for you. First thing you can look for is, how does this support the sustainability of the impact? So that's one question you can ask. Second question you could ask is, what I heard you say is, it doesn't work if the grant takes us in a direction that's inconsistent with the rest of the organization. In other words, it's going to have us have an emphasis on a particular demographic or a particular geographic that is not what we're committed to, yet it looks like good money. And something to point out, and this is also a common hidden thing for us, is often when we see money, how we relate to the money is given by lots of past, as you say, wounds that are maybe wiggling around, etc. And our view of money and our value of money is different from our value of what the money provides for us. And so also what helps in decision making is getting clear, put the money on one side. What is the money providing for? And you can imagine many people overhearing you having a conversation saying, oh, someone offered $1 million grant for us and we turned it down. You can imagine many people going, you're crazy, it's $1 million. But $1 million to do something that isn't the thing that you're committed to doing is actually not worth anything. So somehow separating that out, looking rather than what's the dollars, look at what is it buying? Because if what it is buying is directly on strategy for you, directly in line in your commitment and purpose, then of course it looks like a good thing to say yes to. And if it's not that, it's actually a sensible thing to say no to. I would say my diagnosis for you is to develop yourself a clear process for making those decisions when these grant and other opportunities present themselves, and at least two of the things you want to have in that process. One is, what's the value of this in terms of the sustainability of the impact? And secondly, what does this actually provide for that's in line with our business strategy and the outcomes that we want? I also heard another thing, and just to test on that, is you talk about your pride in the culture and the values that you have in your business. And one of the things that I also see a lot with other business leaders is where their businesses are not being successful is where the way they're running is inconsistent with their values. And so anything, again, a grant opportunity that comes forward that would have you operate in a way that isn't in line with your values values will not be a happy place for you, I can hear. And so another test, your third test, what we would call in decision-making criteria for whether you accept or not this grant money would be, can we operate in a way that's consistent with our values? And a place that one can look there is the values on the other side. In other words, who's bringing this money forward? How do they operate? And one of the places that can cause a lot of upset in decision making is we might say, yes, I'd like to take that money on. Then our experience of working with whoever is now completely at odds because they've got some other agenda going on. And again, that sounds like that would be a decision that if you made that, you'd be unhappy with. The goal in all of my diagnosis is to have people make decisions that they're comfortable with, that of course then turn out the results that they want. And that's only going to happen if you can make these decisions coherently and consistently with the things that you're thinking about. So how does that help you, Rob?
That's great. I really appreciate that. That's a good way to view the decisions, the multiple decisions really. So thank you.
You're welcome. And I think that's a helpful thing for all of my patients to think about, is to try and get to what is the real decision here.
Yeah.
And if we can see what that is, then we can find a way of making that specific decision. And for you, it's a number of decisions that you'll know you're going to be facing. And to be able to say, oh, now I've got a consistent basis for those. Each time you make one decision, you can sit back and move forward with great success and commitment and confidence. So thank you for bringing that to the clinic today. I just do have to say I really appreciate the work that you're doing and the contribution you're making and the impact you're having. And it takes something to explore this kind of issue. Good luck.
Thank you, Paul.